And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live. Well, actually live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network here in the bunker in an undisclosed location in La Prave, Providence, Rhode Island. The city that never sleeps. The city of a million souls. A couple of those stories we're going to talk about tonight. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Our mothership for what we call Coalition Radio 2.0 is at coalitionradio.us, where you will find links to our Spreaker page, our YouTube page. And, of course, you can watch us live on Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. And, of course, at the CoalitionRadioNetwork.com. So let's get right down to it tonight. For several years now, well, I'm going on probably about 30 or so, I've had a love affair with Providence. My wife and I moved from the greater New York metropolitan area to Providence in the 80s. Imagine, in the 80s. Back when Vincent A. Buddy Cianci was a larger-than-life figure, had just finished Buddy 1.0, long before Buddy 2.0 ever became a thing. The rivers hadn't been rerouted yet. It was an interesting downtown scene. To say that Providence was a crazy stew of art, funk, galleries, burgeoning restaurant scene, this is actually all when it started. And I fell in love with a city that reminded me largely of, if you will, one large neighborhood in New York City, without the congestion, without the crime, without the chaos. It was really the best of all worlds. University scene, RISD. Johnson & Wales was really just Johnson & Wales College back then or something like that. And, of course, Brown University with RISD dominated the social scene. Thayer Street was a very special place in my life. I love Thayer Street. I refer to it as Rhode Island's sort of own buffet. You've got restaurants, movies, books, art, everything great in life, everything that makes life worth living. That confluence, if you will, of Brown and RISD gives us Thayer Street and gives us the East Side and gives that sort of funky edge downtown. For all the naysayers who sometimes take shots at Brown or RISD or any of the area universities, I often point out that without that scene, well, we'd be another Bridgeport or Stamford, kind of a soulless, empty place. Nice enough place to live, wonderful place to raise a family. But no, we've got better. We've got really the best of all worlds here. And so we celebrate Thayer Street, and after a brief time on this show, we got to know Donna down at the Thayer Street District Marketing Association. And in doing so, we've been introduced to a number of just great local businesses, people whose literally body, heart, and soul is poured into their business. Their business is literally an extension of themselves personally every day. And we've had folks visit us over the years and join us and talk about their restaurants and bookstores. But now it should be no surprise to anyone that we are facing challenged times. And Thayer Street, as we know it, continues to evolve. But there is still a strong local presence on Thayer and in Providence itself of local folks who run businesses, merchants, purveyors, again, bookstore, you name it. And they need our support now more than ever. So as a free service to these folks, we're just going to release and take an opportunity to interview them on the air, give us a little perspective on their business, how they came to be, what their passions are. And we're going to find ways for you to support them. And I see if there's any silver lining from this chaos, I see the innovative spirit in the small business community to be stronger than ever. Rather than just lay down, folks are coming up with unique ideas on how to extend their business into ways that heretofore were thought impossible. Is a confluence of the technology, people's willingness to accept rapid changes, and being early adopters and using that technology. And there's a lot of creativity in the background. And no, I have to tell you, when we put the word out that we were going to start this series, I can't think of a single business who's really out-innovated and used technology in a more creative way than the folks who are just joining us right now. All right? It's the Thibodeaux of Ritual Sweat Society. And they can be found on the web at ritualsweatsociety.com. Folks, welcome to the Coalition, and thanks for joining us on a hectic Friday night. Yeah, no worries. So when you think of yoga studios, my wife is an active member of the yoga community here in Providence, and she's been to Kripalu and a few places like that. You think of a local studio, you think of sweat yoga or whatever they call it. So what happens in a moment like this in our community when literally retail overnight has been shut down? And we're going to talk about their solutions. We're going to try and display for you online what they've come up with as an approach. But let's start from the very beginning. When did you guys get involved in, shall we say, setting up a yoga studio? How long has it been a passion of yours? And I know that you've got another facility as well. Give us the background, the whole story.
Yeah, so my name is Corey. I have been a yoga teacher for about 2 years before I became a teacher. So yoga has really just become my whole life. Trying to get my husband to maybe become a teacher soon. So for me, yoga, it's all about connecting the body to the mind and just completely being able to let go the second you step onto your mat. And it's truly a life-changing practice. So I started teaching power vinyasa, and I was teaching at a couple studios in Rhode Island. And then I started teaching for Ritual Sweat Society. And the location had just opened on Thayer Street in July of 2018. And I started teaching there. And then an opportunity just kind of came about for me and my husband to take ownership of the location. We both have our business degrees, and so yoga is my passion, and this just felt like a really exciting opportunity that we couldn't turn down. So we took ownership of the Thayer Street location this past October, and we made some changes to the schedule and brought in some new teachers, and we've built a really amazing team. And we've been able to connect with the Providence community, and that's really been our goal.
If you will, give us a little background on, if you will, the different schools of yoga. I think what happens is that folks who are not familiar with it or haven't had a friend involved with it, I'm not going to say it's intimidating, but there are a variety of schools and approaches. And how does that work?
Totally. So we offer a couple different types of yoga at the studio. So Power Vinyasa was created by someone called Baron Baptiste, and it's a very, I would say, athletic form of the practice. It connects breath to movement, and that's really the core of everything that we do. From there, we teach some more restorative practices. So that's more like yin yoga, where we hold the poses for longer, you're on your back, and it's super relaxing, great right before bed. And then we also teach something called 1111 the practice, which was created by a woman named Tara, and it is essentially the power vinyasa practice, but with cardio infused into it. And we do it to super fun, upbeat music. It's almost like a cycling class, but on your mat. So it's fun, it's energetic, you can kind of yell and scream and have fun, which is different compared to a quiet power vinyasa class. So we do a mix of all three of those. So our studio is open to anyone at any level who wants a certain type of class.
Yeah, we probably 50% of our classes are the 1111 format, and the other half are the power vinyasa classes that we teach.
Well, no, that's excellent. So
Corey teaches, rather.
So in terms of skill levels, what type of skill level is appropriate for that type of class? And do you offer things across different skill levels? Do you have introductory classes?
Yep. We do, yes. So we have beginner classes. They're called our novice classes. But really any class is open to anyone at any level. Every teacher takes the time to introduce themselves to new students, kind of understand where they've gone if this is their first class, or maybe they haven't practiced in a year. And so really every class is open to all levels. That's one of the biggest misconceptions of yoga, is that you have to be good at it before you show up. And that's just not true at all. My first class, I had no idea what I was doing.
Excellent. And you encourage couple participation as well?
Yes. Except
encourage, maybe, yeah. But we have plenty of clients that will come in that are couples. Mm-hmm. There's a couple people that come to Corey's Sunday morning power vinyasa classes that are very popular. That are couples that will come.
A lot of friends too.
Yeah.
So things were going along swimmingly, if you will. You'd taken over
Yes.
the business. You'd re-energized it. You'd found really decided to retool it a little bit. You introduced, I think, something very unique, and that is cardio and yoga into one program. So you don't have to belong to 5 different facilities. And
Sure.
Corona happens. What's your immediate? What's your first thought?
Well, it's been challenging for sure. Initially, when this happened, I think it was on March 9th, we actually shut down the studio. That was before any mandates came out from Mayor Lorza. Now there's a requirement that, gyms and fitness studios, things like that, are closed down. But when we saw at that time that we started brainstorming about what could we do. We had already seen some other yoga studios that had started putting classes online that were offering class packs. And so our thought was, well, we live in a time where it's possible to do a lot of these things virtually. And so we said, why don't we just, we have time now. We're not teaching classes in the studio. So we can go and record classes, put them online, have people buy them. It's a way for the people who love the format that we've set up in the studio, who love to come to us. It lets them stay engaged with us and continue to work out with us. And it lets us, generate a little bit of money while we are closed down right now. And, that's the goal for, not just us, but a lot of the small businesses out there right now, is figuring out, how do we still make money in a time like this? How do we, keep the lights on while maybe the doors are closed? So that's what we've been trying to do.
So, in terms of the production, you've how many different classes and how many different categories within your class have you already committed to video?
So we have created 2 series, I'm calling them, of classes. The first one is a mix of Power Vinyasa and 11:11 the practice. There's also a couple variations of 11:11 the practice, so that each series kind of gives you a mix of all of them. And then we just released the second one this past Tuesday, which has 2 Power Vinyasa classes, one that's primarily focused on the core, and then a more restorative version of the 11:11 practice, and then a more kind of cardio HIIT, high intensity workout version as well. And then we are also starting to do some live classes. So on Sunday, I streamed my live Power Vinyasa class. That's usually really popular on Sunday mornings. So I streamed that live, donation-based, via Facebook and our Instagram handle, which I can share with you. And then next week, we're hoping to get into filming classes, 2 classes a week, and actually live streaming those via a Zoom platform or something that works like that. So we'll have the classes you can buy in bulk, live class on Sunday, and then 2 live classes throughout the week. So we're trying to make sure we can get to everybody and keep all, as Joe said, keep all of our students engaged.
Talk, if you will, about the core. That's, if you're kind of a cynical, hardened realist like myself, who spends most of his lifetime wallowing in the world of Rhode Island politics, something as ethereal as the core seems completely beyond me. Explain that concept.
So it's really just trying to get those abs in shape and ready for summer when we're all released out of our house, really. But no, really, the whole point of our yoga practice is to engage the core. A lot of the times we think about the core as just like, oh, like those cool, like 8-packs that like supermodels have, but really it's more of just learning to engage the body and bring body awareness through our core, which wraps around our entire body. And that's, what allows us to stand up straight and walk and do things. So when I say a class is focused on the core, it's just really about bringing the mind-body connection from brain to, okay, let me think about how to engage my abdominal muscles here.
Excellent. Thank you for that. The whole process of bringing to fruition video, and this is what I find remarkable about small business people, because, adapt, improvise, and overcome is our mantra, isn't it? The notion, how many weeks has it been since you first brainstormed the idea of bringing your classes and some of which are hybrid and unique to your market, to video, how and actually it coming to fruition where folks can engage digitally.
Literally, it was like instantaneous. We were like, we have to do something, and I've already been with our teachers, so I was like, I feel safe being around you guys. We'll put our mats 6 feet apart, and let's just get in there and start filming. And I definitely, first couple trial and error, and now I feel like we know what we're doing. We're like real amateur videographers here. But there really was no time to think about it. It was just, okay, this is an idea. Let's just try and do it.
Yeah. It really was almost instantaneous to, we had to shut down, and we, our first thought was let's get classes online and let's see what sort of traction we get. Let's see if people are interested in this. And as soon as we realized, okay, this is viable, this is something we can do, we were able to improvise, adapt, overcome. It's still kind of early, so we'll see what happens, but it's worked out well so far.
Yeah, at some point in the next.
And I think also with these.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say that it's also been interesting with our online classes because we're actually able to reach other people that don't live in Providence, which has been interesting too. So we've seen a lot of support from various people that just happen to follow us on Instagram, or friends that we have that live in California and sharing it with their friends. So it's been really interesting. One of our members said that she took our live vinyasa class on Sunday, and she messaged me on Instagram saying, well, I actually got to take it with my friend who lives in New Jersey. They, virtually took class together. So it's interesting because yoga is all about joining together, and we've actually been joining more people together, not just in the Providence area.
So there's a very real possibility that you can break through that traditional bricks and mortar ceiling, if you will, that's very often placed on businesses like yours, where you need an immediacy of contact. And you've got the potential now to expand this literally globally. I mean, you can be everywhere and anywhere. That's just outstanding. We're going to try and bring up, and again, folks who are listening to our show for the first time understand that we've had to do our own adapt, improvise, and overcome. I'm fortunate that I'm truly blessed that I've got an amazing producer here. So what we're going to try and do is bring up one of your videos. Will they be able to speak over the video?
Yeah, they should be able to.
Okay, so they'll be able to speak over. We loaded up one of the two videos. We're going to try and play it right now. And maybe if it's possible, give us a little description over what's happening.
Sure.
Here. Let's go, take it down.
This is a clip from 11:11 practice. So in this class, we find movement in our yoga poses. So this is a side
Three
plank.
more,
In a
three.
the class, you might just hold.
Two.
In 11:11, we're finding
Last
movement
one,
here.
hold.
Open up
Into
all
your
of the
high
muscles to the
plank.
side body.
Tap opposite shoulders. Woo!
And then here, this is that.
Keep pulling that
core
low belly in.
So here, we're bringing awareness to those abdominal muscles.
Deep breathing. You got this. 3, 2, last one each side.
What's the
Nice
average?
work, downward facing dog.
Say again, sorry.
What's the average length?
Taking
of
a
one?
few moments to pause here.
Class normally there was 2 minutes, but on our online
Inhale, pull forward to high plank.
because we know that's more realistic.
Exhale, downward facing dog, lifting through your core. 2 more
That's
times,
just powerful
pull
mental image
forward.
of,
Nice,
just this
one more
training
time,
of
go
small
back.
toddlers running underneath.
And pull
But
forward.
at the same, but this
Yeah,
is
Woo, hold this plank. Tap
Again,
right
this is
knee down
outstanding.
and switch. Nice
this
job.
didn't exist.
Woo.
And of course, you can always watch tapes, but
3,
you've got the ability internally now to generate literally endless variations on the theme in real
Yes.
time, so that whereas folks who are watching the traditional exercise tapes become bored, complacent, and then ultimately leave them behind, you can mix this and match them and do whatever you want to do on the fly, based in
Totally.
and the beauty of the free market is, I have a feeling, have you gotten a lot of response in terms of suggestions or people's input from different customers who are doing this?
just that they love that they're getting a variety of instructors, because every instructor teaches in a slightly different way.
Mhm.
And also every single class is different. So same as our studio, you're never going to walk in and get the same exact sequence that you did before. We're all about creativity and finding new movement in the body, and we're delivering that online as well.
Wow. How many do you have up total now?
Right now, between the 2 series, we have a total of 8 classes and 2 meditations.
All right. If you're just joining us, by the way, the Thibodeaux are with us. They are the owners, purveyors, if you will, shopkeepers of a fascinating mix of a real-time bricks and mortar yoga studio on Thayer Street. And that's at what, 286 Thayer Street?
286.
Yep.
286 Thayer Street in La Prave, the Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. And at the same time, in real time, they're generating a series of videos so that you can enjoy these and talk about, if you will, how therapeutic it must be for folks who find themselves now literally doing their own castaway thing. It's a week and a half to 2 weeks into it, depending on your perspective. It's real now. It's the novelty of going out for those walks outside, and the novelty of this or that, or binge watching whatever you do on Netflix. That's beyond us now. Now it's when it gets real, because it appears that we're going to be in this situation for a minimum of several weeks. How therapeutic have just this kind of interaction of your customers found?
I think our customers have really appreciated it and really enjoyed it. And you were talking about what kind of feedback have we gotten before. I'd say that's been the biggest feedback that we've gotten, is our customers are just appreciative that we're attempting to do something. We're trying to bring the studio from Thayer Street into their homes, and we're figuring out a way to do that works. It lets them continue to support us. For the people who pay for unlimited memberships at our studio, they're getting them for free, so that's a nice benefit for them. It's incredibly therapeutic. We both work full-time jobs in addition to running the studio, and so we've been working from home for the last 2 weeks. And even just us, we've found a need to maybe have some of our own separate time, be away from each other a little bit because we're in the same house all the time. But finding those avenues through which we can unwind and relax, not read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, your mainstream media, and just do something that is special to you, something that matters. And for our students for whom doing yoga and stretching and getting into their bodies, for them, that's really important. And so for them to still be able to do that, it's a big deal.
If folks had memberships already, are you grandfathering this into them in a sense, or how did that work logistically?
Yes. So we've been chatting with our members. Our members really come like 4 to 5 times a week, so we know them pretty well. And we have given everyone the option to pause their membership if they like. We obviously know this is a really difficult time for everybody and things are uncertain, but for those who are able to and want to continue to pay their monthly membership, they're getting all of the classes for free. So we're delivering them right to their emails. And then we're also going to be providing our online classes starting next week, like I said, and they'll get to join those for free as well. But they've really been our biggest brand ambassadors, if you will. They're sharing constantly through Instagram that they're doing our classes. They're messaging us and all the instructors. So our members have been truly amazing during all this.
How far do you plan on taking this? I mean, how many? Is it literally endless, the variety of classes? Is there a variety of yoga forms and class styles that you'd like to tell us about, that you'd like to move into next? Because all of a sudden you've got unlimited potential?
I think sticking to what we have now works. There's so much more that we can actually explore in the 3 styles of yoga that we're teaching right now. And again, they're all really they're all really similar. It's just different ways of approaching the class format.
We're going to bring up your second video right now. We're going to see if we can do this magically.
Oh, sure.
Second time. Just like you did last one, just kind of lead us through what folks are going to. We're going to let the whole
Engage your core here, lifting up through the triceps.
Yep. So in
3,
this one here, we're
2,
finding some
last one each side. Pausing down in the left Skandasana. Hands to heart.
Because everyone's hypothetically sitting all day working from home. And then here we're working on opening through the hamstring.
Option to pulse it
I
up
also provide a
and
lot of
down.
modification in class as well. So for example,
Ooh,
you
nice
you
work.
could just hold that standoff.
3, 2,
Also worth
and 1. Release your hands down, lifting yourself up to your straddle fold. Toes are in. Walk your hands underneath you this time, allowing your head to fall closer down towards the
a
earth.
couple things that we will tell at retail.
Lifting up through the kneecaps to engage your
And
legs.
this is a forward fold here. Forward folds are like the best thing for you. It just allows you to kind of release any tension through the neck.
Is there somebody tense around here? Is there tensions? I hadn't noticed that. Wow. No, it's just so timely. You do have a retail store. Tell us about that.
Say again, sorry.
You do have a retail store. So give us a lowdown on some of the products that you've got for sale.
Sure. So we have a couple different things that we do. So like you had mentioned at the beginning of the show, we are a second location for a studio. Tara Winterhalter is her name. She's the original founder for Ritual Sweat Society, the original studio being in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. She's still in charge of that, runs that, and we run this studio for her. We run it as our own business. And what she does a lot is she will go out and design her own apparel. That's Ritual Sweat Society brand. If you look, actually, Corey's wearing one of the pieces that Tara has designed. It's really popular. So good, probably 50% of the retail store are the pieces of apparel that we'll sell. That can be things like sports bras, sweaters, joggers, leggings, things along those lines that are Ritual Sweat Society branded. We'll also sell just kind of a range of products that we enjoy. We have, for example, a candle company that we found in California that we really liked. We discovered that they do wholesale accounts, and so we said, hey, can we sell your products? They said, sure, and so we sell those in the store. We have a couple local business owners that make small products that make sense to sell in retail. So for some of them, we have a consignment model. For some of them, we actually buy the products from them outright and sell them in the store. So we have a range of different things that we'll sell at retail.
We also sell Fully Rooted Kombucha, which is a local business as well. So we do some cross promotion there.
Yep.
Excellent. Both of you work full time. It sounds like, thankfully, you're still engaged in that. Do you find any competitive? I mean, in a large sense, I'm in the same position. I love doing this. I do have another job. I could find myself locked in this studio pretty much 7 by 24. I think there was a movie about that. But they'd have to haul me out. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, and I'm sure you have wonderful professional jobs during the day, but is there a tease element here that you're doing what is kind of possibly been a fantasy for you all along? You're able to just really throw yourself at it right now?
I think so. It's a good question. I think what we've learned from this, we were already dedicating tons of time outside of our regular jobs to the studio as much as we could. A lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights, very typical kind of, entrepreneur sort of talk. I think what this has taught us is that, it's easy to try new things. It's easy to try to expand something even when you don't have a lot of time. Both of our jobs, luckily, are, very stable right now, which, we're very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of people out there right now who are struggling. So, we try to be very gracious of that and keep that in mind. But yeah, it's just reinvigorated the entrepreneurial spirit inside of us, I think, that we can really do anything. Everyone gets the same amount of time in a day, and it's just, it's what you do with it.
Yeah. Someone once said to me that when years ago, I had a business in Providence and I was completely self-employed. And someone said to me once, well, that's great. You get to set your own schedule. And yeah, I responded to them with kind of I think they were a little shocked when I told them, yeah, if I'm awake, I'm working. But but there's a beauty in that because, again, this business is a reflection of both of you personally on an individual level and also your ability to collaborate. And there's just a simple beauty in that. And that's what I love about small business. And what I love about Rhode Island is the incredibly eclectic nature of say, even a Thayer Street. I mean, how much energy does Providence give you in and of itself as this quirky kind of crazy city to do something like this, which is literally on the bleeding edge? I mean, is the atmosphere in this city actually provoked you, prompted you, supported you?
It has. It's so funny because I always used to joke that I didn't think I'm from Rhode Island. I didn't think I would end up here. And I'm like, well, here I am. And I'm just never going to move because I just love this city. This journey, I didn't realize how amazing the small business community would be. And we started to meet so many amazing people. There are so many cool and different creative small businesses. And it actually is really invigorating because it makes you want to do more and connect more. And how can you do a pop-up with this small business or this small business? And it's just a really great community. And, I've even been texting a couple small business owners over the past couple of weeks, kind of keeping in touch, making sure we're supporting them. We feature them on our Instagram. They feature us. And it's really invigorating. Yeah.
And Pat, you mentioned before, you set your own hours and it's basically, if I'm awake, I'm working. That can get pretty, it's easy to kind of get a little discouraged after a while, if that really is the kind of schedule that you're trying to do. And that's definitely what's been happening to us. And I find a lot of support from small business community. Like Corey said, we've met a ton of business owners recently. It's super energizing. And I think Providence has this very unique blend of, a very artistic community, a community that cares about its people, that cares about the city, and a community that cares about small business and cares about local business and cares about supporting it. I think it's, I don't know if it's unique or not, but I'm maybe it's not unique, but I'm grateful to be a part of it. I think we're both grateful to be a part of it for sure.
Yeah, have you had an opportunity to go down to Ceremony yet?
Oh, yes.
We have actually.
Yes, we love Michelle.
Michelle's the owner. She's a good friend of ours now. We've been a couple times.
I live on matcha, so I only buy my matcha from her, my little tins. Yes, we love Ceremony.
Yeah.
And how about have you been to Impact Everything?
Yes.
We have actually. Right before pretty much all this went off the rails and all of this happened. So one of the things that we'll try to do, or we were doing before we had to shut down, was we tried to do one donation class a month. And we were having that take place in the studio, basically just a regular class that's free. And it's donation based. And what we've been doing is kind of picking a different charity every month or some kind of cause to give back to. In January, before coronavirus had really kind of overtaken the headlines, we did a class. We raised $300 for the Australia Wildfire Relief Fund. I think we gave the money to the Australian Red Cross.
Yep.
And so we did that. And right before this happened in March, we were actually speaking to the owners at Impact Everything, Lana and Saroj, to try and do the same thing for them because they do a lot of really awesome relief work. I think they're building a school right now in Uganda, or they're planning a relief trip to go and do that. And they've done like a women's center and I believe a school in Nepal as well. So I went and spoke to them. Again, entrepreneurial spirit in Providence is really just amazing. They're a great team, and we tried to support them with this donation class. We want to still do it. We've obviously been a little sidetracked trying to keep our studio open first of all, but we've spoken to them and we're trying to figure out a way to continue supporting them in their mission as well.
And the reason why I brought up the other two businesses, I've met all the owners. We've done little things on location. I hope we can do that when you folks reopen. But sure. I want to make an important point about Thayer Street, and I'm going to let you. I'm going to be a tiniest bit political right now. There's been a lot of cause for chatter about the corporatization of Thayer Street, if you will. What I have found out is that the unique, the diverse, and the complex nature of local businesses like yourself, like Impact, like Ceremony, I believe has brought Thayer Street really to a new level. I mean, we understand that Thayer Street's its commercial purpose initially was to support students at Brown and RISD, but it's taken on so much more cultural relevance than that. And why it's important for me to have a conversation with, innovative folks like yourself is to point out that Thayer Street is very much a unique commercial ecosystem, if you will, that it has got, I believe, actually more diversity, more complexity, more nuanced commercial activity, really, than its entire history. And I know we've lost over the years some great businesses. I go back to something called the College Hill Bookstore. But when I look at efforts like your own, or I look at some of the other businesses that I mentioned tonight, it says to me that the heart and soul of Thayer Street is still there. It's alive, and in a lot of ways even better than before. So when I ask Rhode Islanders, whoever hear this or see this, to take a moment, think about the businesses on your block. I call it Rhode Island's virtual buffet, not just because of the restaurants, because of folks like yourself. When things come back, certainly run, don't walk down there. Spend an afternoon, go to one of your classes in the morning, catch a flick at the Avon in the afternoon, perhaps engage in some day drinking. I think we'll all need it at that point. And Andreas or any one of the great local restaurants on the street, and really embrace that scene, because if nothing else, if our hopefully temporary captivity, for lack of a better term, has any silver lining, it's that to understand what we've got in Rhode Island, firms like you're the ones that you run, and to know how much, I'm not going to say taken for granted, but to a certain degree, we've assumed that it will always be there. And this past few weeks have really pointed out the fragility of life and nature. And we need to do what we can now to support businesses like yourselves, and we need to thoroughly embrace them once we're able to return to whatever waits for us. And so again, I thank you for coming on tonight. We want to go through all the websites and everything, make sure everybody knows how to find you. But I thank you, A, for coming on, B, retaining that entrepreneurial spirit in perhaps the most challenging times in our nation's history, and at the same time, making a lot of fun. So congratulations on your efforts. How can, again, folks find you, participate, join in, buy from you? Give us the full rundown. Shameless promotion time.
Yes.
Go
so the best way, Instagram, we are at Ritual Sweat Society, PVD. We're also the same, facebook.com/Ritual Sweat Society, PVD. From both of those channels, you can find the link to our Vimeo page where we are selling our class series that I mentioned. You can also visit vimeo.com/Ritual Sweat Society PVD. We have a page there with series 1 and series 2. So those are the three best ways to reach us. There's my dog. Again, I would say Instagram, that's where we're the most active, and that's where we post updates daily. You can meet our instructors, see what classes we're going to be holding, etc. So that's Ritual Sweat Society PVD on Instagram. Excellent.
Well, again, Ritual Sweat Society, the next time you're on, you're going to explain to me how that, great name, provocative and evocative at the same time. But Ritual Sweat Society, they're at 286 Thayer Street normally, and they're all over the web. You'll find links to them here as we share this video with you going forward. All the links will be there, so you can reach out to them and listen. For a lot of folks who maybe never had the opportunity to try yoga, this may be that golden moment, and you get to do it in the privacy of your own home. So,
exactly.
Yes.
Congratulations, folks, and I look forward to meeting you sometime in the near future.
Thanks. Can't wait.
Thank you very much, Pat. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Folks, we're going to take a quick break now for a few minutes. At the 7 o'clock hour, well, an old friend of the Coalition is rejoining us at Coalition 3.0. Of course, he is Professor Andy Fernandez. He is with the Western New Mexico State University. We are going to rekindle his ongoing series about conversations about border, the politics, the life, the realities, how that's working in the age of Corona. We're going to have some surprising conversations here. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Here in the bunker, an undisclosed location. It's me, it's Dick Cheney. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Andy, can you hear us?
Can you hear us? Television media. So as normal, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and the mothership coalitionradio.us. You know, if you could take a moment tonight, if you're listening to this, or if you listen to it on our podcast or our YouTube channel in the future, take a moment to like us or follow us on any one of these media styles. Independent media relies on social media to get the word out and to find a way through the smoke and mirrors that is the mainstream media. That old Springsteen song about how many stations and there's nothing on. Even in challenge times like this, when the nation is fraught, when it's facing incomprehensible challenges, when for the first time in our nation's history we're effectively shut down, the mainstream media only seems to be able to regurgitate the same tired nonsense. The on and on struggle between the duopoly, the Republican and the Democratic Party, the personalities, and of course, rather than analyzing issues or the challenges these issues present to the nation, instead we spend the entire day handicapping which side is going to win. And the only result of that is no one will win. In the current conflict that exists on Capitol Hill, where even something is what should have been straightforward, some type of bailout bill, or, you know I'm a libertarian, so you know how I feel about all that crap. But even then, they couldn't resist the politics, not of personal destruction anymore, of national destruction. It's tiring. So let's get on. Let's move the culture forward. Let's move knowledge forward. Here in the Coalition, by the way, when we say we're outrage porn free, what we mean by that is I am never, as the general manager of the station, if you will, the Grand Poobah, the chief water buffalo, I am never going to use emotions and conflict to drive a story. I am never going to resort to sort of base, if I dare say, intellect in order to promote the station. There's no need for it. there is fodder for conversation in every aspect of the national crisis we face, and in that conversation, we find resolutions, we find innovations, we find a future, we find a path. So why bring ourselves down into the muck that the CNNs and the Fox Newses will do? It makes absolutely no sense. Never before in our nation's history have we needed the innovation, the power of intellect, the free market that is so much a part of the American experience. But let's get down to our next guest. He, too, is a repeat offender here on the Coalition. What do I mean by that? He has been appearing with us for, nigh going on a year now. We met under the most interesting circumstances. Since this is kind of a station reboot this week, we'll discuss them. But joining me now is Andy Hernandez. He is the Associate Professor of History, Politics, a Renaissance man at the Western New Mexico State University. When I look at some of the course offerings, and I love to do this, Inter-American relations, 20th century relations, drug wars, revolution and civil war in Latin America, colonialism, slavery, Central America, religion in Latin America, modern Latin America, colonial Latin America, the Mexican Revolution, Christianity and the Roman Empire, world civilization. That's the breadth of course offering he has at the Western New Mexico State University. We met under interesting circumstances. We'll just discuss in a minute. But Andy, it's been a month or two. We've transitioned to our new station. Welcome back to the Coalition. Andy, can you hear us? How are we doing there? Andy, can you hear me at all? If I can explain a little bit. In past sessions, Andy has broadcast from his university facilities. Now, because of the coronavirus crisis, he has found himself at a, like so many folks in both the academic and the economic and the industrial world, finding themselves having to innovate solutions. Not sure if you can hear us. Can you turn your volume up, Andrew? Ba-ba-ba-ba. We just got to try and reach out to him. You want to bring his video up for a second?
Sure. Andy, can you hear us? Can you talk to him?
Andy, can you hear us?
Pat, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
I don't hear anything on this side.
Does he have his volume muted or all the way up?
Can you turn your volume up?
Ask him one more time.
And let me know. And I've got an echo now.
Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We should be able to hear you just fine.
Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Can you hear us?
What do you think we should do, El Producer?
We'll take a quick break.
We're going to take a quick break right now. We'll be back in just a moment. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Fine.
Do you see me?
We can.
I can't get behind us.
Yeah, I don't have.
Are we broadcasting at the moment?
We are. Yeah.
Well, we're not live. We're not live.
Give me 30
Okay.
seconds to grab a charger just so this laptop doesn't die on me, and I'll be right back.
Media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the goal. Well, in the bunker, in an undisclosed location. Several former vice presidents, the ghost of Spiro Agnew, Dick Cheney, they're all with us here at our bunker. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalitionradio.us, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. You can watch this show now in a couple of different ways. We are on Periscope, so please follow us at Twitter at coalition_radio. You can watch us on Facebook Live at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. But you can also watch us in the future and listen at coalitionradionetwork.com. Now, I don't know if anybody in this audience or whoever happens to listen to this segment has been zucked, but of course, we've all in social media got this unholy reliance on, well, social media. So we ask as many folks as possible to listen and watch at coalitionradionetwork.com so that we can develop, if you will, a more direct way of reaching out to you. One that will be less, if you will, less tied to the fortunes of any one of a number of tech media bazillionaires. So let's get back to it. Joining us for the first time since we've gone now to Coalition 3.0 is someone I believe is truly a Renaissance man. We read off in the run-up to the segment a number of the courses that he does. Of course, he is Professor Andy Hernandez of the Western New Mexico State University. Andy, thanks for joining us and welcome back to the Coalition.
It's great to be back, Pat. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit. First of all, give us let's use this as sort of a reintroduction. It's only been a month or so, but you know we're in a different platform. Different people are watching for the first time. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Let's see. I have been a professor of Latin American studies for the better part of 10 years now. I was in an administrative role before that, so 20 years in higher education. I emphasize relations between the United States and the countries of Latin America in my research, and the border and border violence. So those are quite a few interrelated topics. My research publications cover violence along the U.S.-Mexican border in the early 20th century, and actually the attempts to build a new interoceanic canal in Nicaragua that are currently dormant, but it's led me to keep an eye on that country and that region and its place in the larger world in the last several months, even though that project really seems to be defunct at the moment.
Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, the border is a very esoteric subject, the type of thing that you argue about over beers, but probably will never ever visit or never really have a direct relationship or what's more accurate, an interrelationship with. How far are you from the Mexican border, and how much of a part of your life has that been?
I am 30 miles north of the international boundary, and it's even outside of my own professional interests, it's a significant part of my life. I had served on the school board for quite a few years. There are many there are many students who are U.S. citizens who live on the Mexican side of the international boundary. It's pivotal for commerce. The border ties into drug trafficking and in the seemingly insatiable demand by Americans for drugs that still remain illegal to the moment. So that takes us into quite a bit of violence as well. But it's pretty much inextricable from living in a place like this.
And yet at the same time, we'll talk in a moment how we met, but if one were to visit Deming, New Mexico, other than that, instead of a marching band, the Western New Mexico State University has a mariachi band, and a damn fine one at that. Other than that, and maybe a heightened presence of really incredible cooking. Other than that, it would strike you as your typical American middle class, nice small city. I mean, there really is no difference in that sense, is there? So there's this dichotomy exists. That's got to be surreal at times, isn't it?
There can be, and it's interesting because in some respects, this feels like small town America, and in some respects, you see some of the glaring differences. And poverty is one of the ones that really stands out. The county that I live in, so Western New Mexico University serves basically rural parts of New Mexico with an emphasis on the 3 southwestern counties of the state. And so, I mean, there are times that it feels like we're on the edge of the world. There are times that that's very good because so far the 3-county area does not have positive COVID cases yet, but it's inevitable that we will. It also means that we're particularly vulnerable to shipping disruptions that everybody's living with in the country right now. It means that when the world is switching over to online instruction, that I know that there are issues all over the country with student access to nutrition tied to their public school access, or student access to the internet tied to their public school access. Those really seem to be writ large out here right now. I look at the bandwidth that's the high tier that we have in my household, and that's a slow hotel in Los Angeles by comparison for the amount of bandwidth that we're paying a premium for. So sometimes it really does seem like we're on the edge of the world here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, through my interactions with Deming, New Mexico, despite the challenges, I felt a great sense of community. I was introduced to you via a local Methodist pastor, wonderful man. We sat and had a quick meal. Down there, you guys, we have ham and boiled suppers up here. you guys do it right. I had one of the finest church meals I've had in my life at the is it the Deming, New Mexico United Methodist Church? It is.
Yes, it's the First United Methodist Church.
Right. It was astonishing. So we were introduced, if you will. I was given a phone number. Andy and I agreed to meet at a neutral location, which in this case I believe was a Denny's, and we proceeded to talk politics for about 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes loudly, but finding a degree, despite our vastly different experiences in the American body politic, finding a degree of agreement over a range of issues that was quite honestly startling when you think about it, particularly in today's polarized national conversation. So it's been a month or two since we've spoken, and clearly the world has changed. It's almost surreal to think about our last conversation when we were talking about the holidays and have a wonderful Christmas, and let's get together right after the holidays, get you on the air again, and we'll talk about what's happening on the border. The world has changed. You mentioned that you folks haven't been hit directly by this. I live in a state where the governor announced today that she will be stopping New York State vehicles via the National Guard and the state police to reinforce, if you will, take addresses, names, and reinforce the 14-day quarantine period that they're asking for interstate travelers. It's interesting because to me, the day that I left Deming and we had been in Mexico that morning. We'd gone through a border checkpoint. We then, after leaving Deming, went up towards Albuquerque, well into the state of New Mexico. We had to go through another border checkpoint, and then went through fairly extensive. I mean, the TSA doesn't screw around down there. I mean, you're even in Albuquerque, you're only a few hours from the Mexican border. And many times during our conversations, I've kind of mentioned to you, well, what's it like to live in that type of environment? I'm starting to find that out, and it's not particularly pleasant. What's does that strike you as I don't know, darkly humorous, ironic? When you hear someone like me who lives up in New England, as far removed from border realities as possible, what do you think when someone like me says that?
You know, it reminds me, I'm very fortunate to be well-traveled. I have been to Cuba, I have been to Russia, I have been to China, and I have been to Nicaragua, among many, many other countries. It's not that it's not that I'm picking communist countries to go visit, so I don't want to leave you under that impression. But you know, these are all research interests for me. I haven't run into internal checkpoints in those countries, and I'll admit I haven't driven border to border in each one. But no, it's home where I run into internal checkpoints when I go to El Paso or Las Cruces, or when I drive further into Texas to visit family, or when I am, say, coming back from San Diego to New Mexico, there's another there. The idea of it's so intrinsic to what life is like on the border, and the border is so broadly defined there because Customs and Border Patrol has the authority to stage those checkpoints within 100 miles of the international boundary throughout the country. And that really affects 80% of the population, even when we don't realize it. You know, it might seem foolish to think of Rhode Island as a border state, but in that respect, it still falls within that sphere of authority. Vermont does as well. I think I'd mentioned to you a checkpoint up there when over the summer when the Border Patrol was overwhelmed down here. But you know, you have to experience driving through an external checkpoint in a free country to kind of understand what day-to-day life is like here.
So while all of this madness is going on in the United States, there's wild degrees of misinformation. One of the rumors floating about was that the Mexican government was considering actually closing the border to Americans. Have you heard that scuttlebutt? Is that even remotely true?
So there's a bit of truth to it in that to me, it's kind of like the stay in place orders that New Mexico is under now and so many other states are under at the moment. Yes, the border is closed, but there's a huge asterisk next to that because if you're an American citizen, for example, you can still cross into Mexico for medical treatment and return into the United States. You just have to come back with a statement from a physician in Mexico that you were under care in that country before returning. So that could be anything from getting your teeth cleaned to going and buying some of these experimental drugs or repurposed drugs really that are being mentioned. And so, yes, the border is closed, but the trucks are still delivering trade goods across the border. People are still able to cross with some pretty loose exemptions and return. So the border is still just as much of a sieve as it was before this.
Medical treatment, off-border medical treatment is a significant part of the local economy, isn't it?
It is, yes. I think one thing that it really points to, you know, there are haves and have-nots in the U.S. healthcare system, and even people who have insurance sometimes have significant out-of-pocket costs. And so there are people who will cross the border for different forms of medical treatment or prescriptions or eyeglasses or things like that because for them, it is more favorable for them economically to do that.
Mm-hmm. What's happening in the border in terms of reaction to the coronavirus? What is this considered to be part of the American foreign policy of the state of New Mexico? The state of Texas have any extra legal authorities in preventing or reacting to immigration challenges? I mean, the world was upside down and convoluted there to begin with before this even happened. What impact has this had on cross-border privileges?
So if you look at something, let's look at one thing that really has changed. You and I have talked a lot on previous shows about people who are seeking asylum in the United States from Mexico and Central America, Brazil, and Cuba predominantly, but from many other countries as well. And so the entirety of the last year has been the question of whether or not these people can present credible claims, how they're crossing into the United States, the degree to which they're able to do so, how long it takes to adjudicate those cases, and all of those sorts of things. Those questions are essentially gone at the moment because Homeland Security has taken the stance in recent weeks that anybody who has entered the U.S., even those trying to seek asylum, are immediately returned to Mexico or to another country in Latin America. Now, Mexico is not refusing those deportations yet, but Guatemala, for example, has a third country agreement with the United States that it is presently refusing to accept because they have essentially quarantined their entire country to international traffic, especially from the United States and Europe. And so deportation flights from the United States are not allowed to land in Guatemala at present.
Wasn't that one of the centerpieces, though? These third-party treaties, if you will, for lack of a better term. Wasn't that one of the centerpieces of the alleged success of the Trump administration?
It was, and that very quickly went away in the face of national security and the health crisis.
Interesting.
I would not be surprised further if Mexico has been very fortunate to not have a very large number of coronavirus positive cases yet. I think that, as with any country, there are plenty that are still undiagnosed, or rather have not been identified through formal testing. But as their number goes up and as our number goes up, I would expect that we're going to see them refusing some of these deportation transits as well.
When you look at a city like Mexico City, which, dense, crowded population, wide variety of economic circumstances, much like New York, much like London, much like Paris, the potential for chaos is just got to be exponential. Is the Mexican government? Do you think they're up to this? Are they ready for this? Is it even being discussed?
It is, and they're having some of the same problems that we're having right now. The president of Mexico, as much as a week ago, was not taking this as seriously as he should have, clearly in retrospect as well, and especially in the context of how it's affected other countries. But Mexico's health bureaucracy was taking it very seriously. At the same time, though, there's quite a bit of federalized power in Mexico, so that states are also making individual responses. Some of them have started to approach the type of stay-at-home orders that we're seeing in the United States. And in some cases, you have some absolutely outlandish disinformation. In one particular state, the governor of the state said in a press conference in which he was surrounded by throngs of citizens that the coronavirus only infected the rich, that it was not a disease that infected the poor. And though he refused to address those remarks in a subsequent press conference, he essentially doubled down and said that a good plate of mole, I'm not sure if you tried it, it's this exquisite dish native to Oaxaca and a few other states in Mexico. He basically said that a plate of mole was enough to kill the coronavirus, and so that residents of his state should just be eating mole.
Will we be hearing from perhaps a potential Trump endorsement anytime soon for said person? I don't know that our president is reacting that much more intelligently, because we all got something special waiting for us in our Easter basket. So misinformation abounds. Countries are not ready medically with the type of...
Pat, did I lose you?
I can hear you just fine. Did we lose? Oh, he's frozen up. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Pat?
Yeah, can you hear me? Do you think this is the bandwidth issue? Potentially.
But it's weird that we have connectivity, but there's connectivity to us.
It's too bad because this is a great conversation.
Pat, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Sorry, we're having trouble here, Pat. I know you can hear me. I cannot hear you.
You want to try and bring it down one more time?
Let's have him leave and come back.
Yeah, I'll text you. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Pat.
Okay, great. We're just we'll edit this. We'll edit this all together, so don't worry about it.
No problem. Where did I lose you?
Well, I was making a really bad joke about the Reagan administration. Jesus. I was making a really bad joke about the Trump administration. I was wondering are we live now, by the way? We are live. Hi, hey, everybody. So, Professor, can we expect, you were telling me about a head of one of the Mexican states. Would you mind telling me which one it was? I'm learning a Mexican geography.
I believe it's the state of Puebla. It's a beautiful state south of Mexico City.
All right. So in the state of Puebla, folks, the governor, is it considered a governor?
Yeah, he is the governor of the state of Puebla.
Governor of the state of Puebla was saying that a great plate of mole would actually take care of the coronavirus. And I was wondering at that point, I proffered, if you will, the opportunity for an endorsement from our president, President Trump, who truly believes that the Easter basket and the Easter bunny is going to bring us some sense of national redemption. It would be funny, except it's not even remotely. So you've got this variety of responses being geared up for against what will be an eventual scourge. I mean, I wouldn't have thought as recently as a week ago that New Orleans would become one of the epicenters, as is Florida, but for obvious reasons. Again, densely packed urban areas, mix in college spring break and some idiotic behavior, and voila, you've got an epidemic. What impact, from your perspective, and you've sent me a bunch of stuff, and we're going to get into that in a minute, but what impact from your perspective does this have on the supply chain and the national fortunes of Mexico? I mean, clearly we were about to enter a new trade agreement, a new trade world, if you will. Mexican manufacturing does rely to a certain degree on the American retail markets. As people started to see pushback on that now, are people starting to feel it in what I'll call the real Mexico?
I haven't seen it yet. There seems to be great care by both, really, let's include Canada here as well, by all three of the signatory nations to try to disrupt trade as little as possible, because, I mean, the U.S. economy has been hammered in the past 2 weeks, and the economies of the European nations that are in the throes of this right now are in similar straits. So basically each of the North American nations is doing its best to assure the free flow of commerce right now. So I haven't really seen any disruptions there yet, but that doesn't mean that they aren't on the horizon, and that doesn't mean that it won't change at a moment's notice.
Right. There is some humor to be had at this moment. I mean, some. You've got the prospect, if you will, of the illicit drug traffic being replaced by the illicit TP traffic. Tell me about that. What happened down in the Mexican border?
So in the El Paso sector, at least one of the two cases was a U.S. citizen who had crossed into Mexico and bought bleach, bought the anti-malarial drugs that there is some hope that perhaps they're effective, but no really effective trials yet, and brought toilet paper and brought those back across the border. And so the Border Patrol was very vague in its releases as far as what prescription drugs these people were specifically caught bringing back, but they were not bringing explicitly, they weren't bringing marijuana, they weren't bringing opiates, they weren't bringing cocaine, or, well, cocaine really doesn't flow very freely across the border here, but they weren't bringing any of the traditional illegal products that are brought across the border into the United States, but they were most certainly meeting the demand that exists in the United States.
Right. Let's talk about the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. There has been, we talked earlier in the show about the importance, if you will, of elective surgeries and some other ones, but primarily elective surgeries as an important part of the cross-Mexican American exchange of goods and services. Pharmacies in general too. I mean, you've got a completely different regulatory environment in Mexico regarding pharmaceuticals. What's starting to happen there?
You're starting to see Americans flow into border cities. I'm sorry that I'm going to butcher the names, but chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. I believe those are the two drugs that principally people are trying to get in bulk, crossing into Mexico, because those have been touted in different press conferences as drugs that possibly could be used to treat coronavirus. The natural problem is, there are many countries in the world where you don't need a doctor's prescription, where you don't need a doctor's prescription to get pharmaceuticals, and Mexico is one of those. So you traditionally have Americans flowing into Mexico, into the border anyway, for everything from blood pressure pills to Viagra to anything in between. But now that these are starting to be touted in some circles, you're starting to see a rush on those as well. But probably the real human issue is going to be that even if they are effective, there's not a lot of information on what, say, the appropriate dosages are and what are the complications that result from taking them. And so you'll have people popping these like Tic Tacs as part of a trial and error process, hoping against hope that they have their hands on something that will save them.
Law and order across Latin America. You've got these sweeping cross currents of events. You've got still the ongoing situation in Venezuela, which apparently has somehow managed to take a turn for the worse this week. You've got the indictment of Mr. Maduro here in the United States, and you've got this stunning collapse of a system which we had already thought had collapsed. In the meantime, in cities like Rio, you apparently have, the cartels in certain cases and gangs have become law enforcement. Are we seeing at some level a collapse, a complete collapse of society across Central and Latin America? When you look at all these different events, all these different cross currents?
The two places that are coming close to getting to that, and really they're the only two at this point, Brazil's president, Bolsonaro, has been criminally irresponsible about taking any sort of leadership in dealing with the potential transmission of coronavirus. And so that's why you do have different gangs in the Rio area and in a few others that are basically enforcing curfews on their own for the safety of the people who live there. And there's some bit of social justice at work there, but there's also quite a big piece of the fact that this pandemic, is bad for business. And ultimately, we can call them gangs, but they are effectively businesses as well. They're just engaging in quite a bit more illegal commerce than some of the more legitimate businesses that we recognize. So Brazil, that's why you have places like Rio, where curfews are being enforced by non-governmental, essentially criminal organizations. The other place would be Nicaragua, where the regime there is encouraging mass events still with little to no regard of how easily, as you've indicated and as so many other people have indicated, this disease is transmitted by close proximity and high density of people. So, in Nicaragua, the government has been encouraging rallies of state workers, of members of the party, of everyday citizens ubiquitously in the last 2 weeks. And that's going to be a major problem for that country.
When you think about it, we had just really spoken really at the end of the year. It's only March. In a sense, a mere 60 or 70 days has taken place since we've really spoken and gone in depth on any issues. At the time, if we can reflect back, we were looking at a new environment because of these third-party agreements that nations were going to act as buffers, that, that was purportedly going to provide some type of stability, although you and I had predicted at the time societal chaos once those people were returned to the original countries and were returned to, if you will, the jurisprudence system, if I can even dignify it with that term. At the time, economies had somewhat stabilized around manufacturing because of this new trade agreement, which sought to stabilize the relationship between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, so we didn't have these wild swings or these imbalances or chaos because of purported tariffs. And at that point in time, we really hadn't been presented with this type of international health crisis. And yet, when we reflected, as we did in sort of a year-end format, we talked about them being literally on the verge of a nervous breakdown, that it would only take one or two more issues to bring about the collapse that I fear is imminent. You say that there's really only two that are there, and it's Brazil and Venezuela. But and Mexico is living on the edge right now. Is it possible to predict where we're going to be in another couple of weeks? I fear for the region, and I fear for the implications.
Venezuela is an open question because the only other time that the U.S. has actually indicted the present or past leader of a Latin American nation, that was Panama in the 1980s. So that was followed by an intervention where the United States arrested Noriega and brought him to the United States. Mexico, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I may well prove to be wrong, but they have such a pressing national interest to stop accepting the transit of deportees back into that country, no matter what agreements are in place. I don't see any possible way that just out of their own interests, they can continue to abide by that because, again, going back to the types of conditions, and in previous conversations we've had, there are more than 70 million refugees or displaced people across the globe. These are people that are in camps or in conditions that that certainly don't have enough fresh water for hygiene, and many times don't even have it in enough time to wash their hands. Much less the 3 or 4 dozen times that most of us are washing our hands a day right now. So these are people that are we already knew that they were living in horrific conditions wherever they were, whether it was along the U.S. border, whether it was in Turkey, whether it was in other parts of the world. But the consequences of leaving people in that type of squalor are going to be borne by all of the nations that have been effectively or less effectively dealing with the refugee crisis. So, there were a segment of Americans who didn't really mind that asylum seekers were detained in squalor. But when those conditions become a breeding ground for coronavirus and no other nation is going to take those people, well, you have a human rights catastrophe that essentially our policies have brought on us.
Mm-hmm. What should we do? What should the American response be, if any? And how do we resolve this? Where do we go from here?
That's a difficult question because it ties into some other areas of U.S. society that are a bit outside of my specialty. But when you get down to it, you know, I have been pleased but shocked by the number of politicians who are re-examining the penal system in the United States, because prisons are also going to be breeding grounds for spreading coronavirus. And there are so many people who are incarcerated for misdemeanors or nonviolent offenses. And you also take a look at how many asylum seekers or how many people who have crossed the border without papers are themselves being held and treated as if they were violent criminals, but are themselves overwhelmingly guilty of misdemeanor violations, of civil violations that are specifically kept civil because when you're accused of a crime, you have the right to an attorney. When you're accused of a civil violation, the U.S. doesn't have an obligation to provide somebody with an attorney. So there are a lot of things that we're going to have to do some soul searching with, and one of them is going to be our penal system. And so it goes with everything from immigration to the larger system throughout the United States for citizens as well.
And this will take a rare combination of foresight, political bravery, and attention to detail that I'm not quite sure that this administration or the political elite in this nation are capable of, particularly when you reflect back on the behavior of the last few days and achieving something as simple and yet as important as an agreement in what our economic response should be to our own crisis. And that's
I have to say here, I'm not sure that any of the previous administrations was equal to it. But I will say to President Trump's credit that he re-examined the degree to which people are incarcerated for misdemeanors and for fines. And he looked at ways to begin releasing people. That story got quite a bit of press. It would be a slam dunk for him to follow up on that right now. But I think it gets into some areas of policy that contradict with some of his other aims. And so whether it's him or whether it's somebody else, we're really going to be sifting through the ashes and think of a better way to do things in the future after we've counted the bodies and the number of people who are infected.
Right. Well, I don't know if there's much more we can say this evening. We're in the midst of this. We don't know if, in fact, we're not even sure at this point what the true exposure here in the United States is to the disease because of our fundamental incapacity, despite literally billions spent in healthcare, to have established either established as a governmental function or, in my worldview, allowed the free market to create a supply chain for even the most basic tools necessary to assess where we stand at this very moment. The notion that I would be so arrogant as to presume that we would have the answer for any other country is atrocious. So I guess the jury's just going to have to be out.
We do have an element of nationalistic pride where we think that we do have to offer the answers for other countries. But, Austria is one of the countries whose economy and politics are most heavily oriented towards free enterprise. And they still have a national system of healthcare. Now you can buy into the private system, and plenty of Austrians do, but they still have a minimum that's provided as a government service.
Everything's open for discussion at this point, isn't it?
I think we would do well to take a look at what other people are doing well.
But then again, that would require us to be able to have a national conversation. And that seems to be the biggest roadblock.
It would. And I think, it's going to require us to take a look at some things that Americans are really going to find distasteful. It's going to be a blow to national pride if it is Cuba that has used this interferon treatment to actually effectively treat coronavirus. And yet, the only thing that would be worse for us would be to ignore the potential for a treatment when there are so many Americans who are going to be afflicted by this.
Right. We're faced with the prospect this week of Cuban doctors being sent out to the world at large to offer medical support for affected parts of the world.
Right.
One of my friends, if you will, in the Rhode Island market place of ideas, is an avowed Marxist, and he tortures me every month with reports of the lower incidence, as reported, I point out to him, by the Cuban government of child death, and the higher level of medical, Freudian slip there, the higher level of medical treatment available to citizens of Cuba because of their enhanced medical capability. And I've always been one to scoff at them, but again, I think when we come out of this, I believe we will, everything's got to be on the table. So I look forward to this conversation.
I agree. I'm sorry to jump in there. Admitting that if the Cubans have done something right here, admitting that does not mean that we're embracing their system. Yes, they have a remarkable healthcare system, but this was the same system in the 80s that was used to isolate HIV positive Cubans, essentially in asylum and prison type conditions, to be sure that they weren't spreading HIV to the larger population. If Cuba has a treatment for coronavirus, I think that we can recognize them for that without saying that their system is correct.
Right.
I don't know if we will.
The conflict of pride of ownership of ideas plus exigent capitalistic circumstances, again, leads me to be cynical at this point. It's ownership both in the philosophical sense and the legal sense would always seem to be in situations like that to be exclusive of simply finding a solution. Oy. Well, I think we need to get together again in a couple of weeks. I don't want to wait a month because there is this weekend, I think we all, if we're either already home or amongst that few portion of the United States that's actually still conducting business, we're on our way home right now. And there's this sense of dread that somehow this is the weekend when it all either implodes or not. That this has been the run-up, if you will, with what's happening both in New Orleans, Los Angeles, and New York City, that this, in fact, is the moment. And first of all, obviously, as a friend, I let's talk next week. Just make a phone call. Make sure everything's still going on, that we're all good.
I would welcome that, Pat, and I hope you stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, I think, though, we're on the verge right now, and that's what my spidey sense tells me. I'm not sure what your feelings are. You're in a different part of the country, a different perspective literally on everything. But this is that make or break moment. And I hope people continue to act with common sense, that they self-isolate.
At least I lost you on my side again. If you can still hear me, I'll just say that I'd welcome talking again, and I wish you and the folks that work with you and your families all the best.
Mm-hmm. Andy Hernandez, he is an associate professor of history at the Western New Mexico University. Truly a Renaissance man of art, language, and history, providing us with, as always, his perspective. We will put together this in a coherent form. I think some of the challenges that he had mentioned in the run-up to the show in terms of infrastructure are being felt around the country, given weather, given the impact of all of this, homeschooling, extra work, people working from home on the web is being felt. We're going to take a quick break right now. Joe Bishop Henchman is going to be joining us. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com or facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Please follow us and like us anywhere you can. We are sponsor-driven media. Yacht Club Bottling Works, Air Sciences, BeaconShippingAndLogistics.com. are all folks that have supported us for a number of years right now. They're under pressure. We hope you would take a moment, frequent their businesses as well as the businesses we've mentioned if you're local here to the Rhode Island market. There is on the Coalition Radio Network a place where you can become a patron if you will, of the Coalition, and or support us through a variety of online services. We'd hope you take a moment to do that. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Oh, now I can hear them. Testing 1, 2, 3.
We're going to start in just about a minute. I have an echo. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
You are perfect, Joe, but you knew that. Hi, Mike. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Here, well, in the bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of Republican vice presidents, past and present, Dick Cheney, Spiro Agnew, Bob Dole, they're all here. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us. So we're asking for an experiment. If people can watch us on www.Coalition Radio Network, we too are always worried about getting zucked. So we're going to move as much content over to our website, particularly given the third rail nature of what we cover here on a weekly basis. Now moving to a more aggressive schedule. We're in our own studio and in our own setup. We can go 7x24. Yikes. Think about that. Well, joining me is another repeat offender, someone who has joined me in the past on what we call Coalition 2.0, when we were at the Fine People at Go Local Prov Studio. He's here for the very first time. Joe Bishop Henchman. He is a tax attorney of quite repute. Originally with the Tax Foundation, he is in private practice right now. And at the same time, he is an at-large member to the Libertarian National Committee, where I've gotten to know him as a steadfast voice, a voice of calm, if you will, in matters controversial and sacred. Joe, welcome back to the Coalition.
Good to see you again, Pat. I love the new digs.
Hey, it's interesting because we were kind of gradually working on this, and then all hell broke loose, obviously, and we realized we needed to get up and running, because these are moments for libertarians to stand tall in support of their countrymen, in support of their friends, family, and their friends around the world, but at the same time make the point that free markets, individual liberty, self-ownership are the ways not only to prevent situations like this, but where in situations like medical issues arrive, catastrophes like this, that free market structures are in place to help us get them out of them perhaps a little bit sooner. It's a proud time to be a libertarian, and I look forward to continuing to hear from our presidential candidates. But we decided, oddly enough, to go with the remote access first rather than fix up the studio, because I don't know, it just seemed like the thing to do, and it's worked out well for us. But Joe,
there's not a lot of people hanging out in person nowadays, I guess. So
yeah, it's
probably the remote access is the first thing to do.
Yeah, in retrospect. So a little bit about your background. You spent a number of years. In fact, I always like to talk about your interaction with the fine folks here at the People's Republic of Rhode Island, where you attempted over an extended period of time to talk them into some type of sanity, if you will, with some type of taxing system that was fair, measured, and would support business. I'm sorry to report to you that this week I feel like we're about to bear the ill fruits of their failure to support your recommendations. We've got a state that third largest provider of income was casinos, which are now shut down. The second largest provider was small retail, which has been obliterated. The state has come to a grinding halt, and just this past week we had to have a special legislative session to authorize, literally in an American state, to go out to short-term money markets and establish a $300 million line of credit so that they could actually make payroll. Think about that, Joe.
Yeah, no, that's unfortunate. It goes back a long way. Back when Kacheri was governor, I worked with his staff to help reduce the income tax rate. So it used to be 9 something. Now it's, I think, a top rate of 599, or at least will be for right now. We'll see what they end up doing. But ever since then, it was just a lot of coming up to Providence and having some good meals and talking to lots of people, but not a lot passing the legislature. So, I helped do a lot of different sales tax proposals for Rhode Island that unfortunately never went anywhere. One of them that would have just abolished the sales tax, made kind of the Oregon or Delaware of New England in order to create some kind of comparative advantage, something to set Rhode Island as something they do better than their neighboring states. But not a lot of luck with that, and it's unfortunate what I'm hearing. And I'm hearing something about the ACLU fighting some kind of new horrible something. So I hope wherever you are, you're not prevented from leaving because it sounds really scary.
It's what they're doing is, and it's interesting because the Fourth Amendment be damned. They have decided, and given the statistics, I can understand why people would be worried about the impact of this disease exploding in New York City. So as a result, given our proximity, we're about 180 miles away. We are known, particularly in the southern part of the state, as being an affordable, by say Long Island standards or Fairfield County, Connecticut standards, an affordable destination for vacation properties for the New York crowd. And we're via Amtrak or even conventional auto, we're only a couple of hours away. So folks who have bought investment properties on South Shore, we're most known for Taylor Swift, of course, but on Block Island as well. And now all of a sudden you literally see New York place and place heading up, people looking to sort of ride out the storm on the southern shores of Rhode Island. You also, incredibly enough, have people coming here by boat from Long Island in the New York City area because of, we're an international destination spot. Places like Newport and what we call South County, the southern part of Rhode Island, have all sorts of dock slips, islands, coves. So, the whole Lord of the Flies Hunger Games element is alive and real here in part of our state. So the governor has decided that the state police are at the border. The National Guard has been dispatched at TF Green, our airport, as well as our Amtrak stations to essentially meet and greet our fellow travelers from New York, and to reinforce the notion that there is a 14-day mandatory, period of isolation. And it's we need to remember that these folks own property here, that they're not just showing up as refugees, that in fact, some of them have quite lovely vacation homes. And if this is where they choose to ride out the storm, I'm convinced that if you can afford property at some of these destination spots, you probably have enough common sense to self-quarantine. But the police are now authorized to stop. And, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is certainly a very scary time with everything going on with the virus. And, libertarians have been debating a lot of the different responses and kind of what is appropriate in the time of an epidemic, of a very easily transmittable disease going around, and then what goes too far. And it has been interesting seeing, two things. One, just kind of a lot of libertarians being very understanding about a lot of the different measures that are appropriate and would actually do something about it, especially if it's combined with the FDA getting out of the way of blocking testing, which they did up until about 11 days ago, and a lot of the other ideas out there. But what's also been interesting is kind of the immediate instinctual move by a lot of politicians and a lot of media to close the border or beef up the border, as if this is not transmitting person to person within your state, within your country already. It's in Rhode Island. I don't know what putting people on the border is going to really accomplish, other than, I guess, expose more Rhode Islanders to people arriving. Because, if you're having Rhode Island National Guard or police talking to these people, from what I understand, you can transmit it in close conversation. So
there isn't a lot of common. There isn't a lot of common sense here. If the pure intent was to reinforce the 14-day containment period, then clearly using the Amber Alert system with billboards, radio, and on and on and on would be enough to do that. Unfortunately for us, the concept of being woke as a libertarian, if you will, on libertarian matters, this is starting to fulfill some of our, I'll call it our queasiest moments. we openly talk about the right to bear arms against an oppressive government. And for many folks, this is the early warning signal for just that. And reasonable people would still want to stand back and step down and say, we need to get together as a community, as a country, and react with common sense. But it appears that the never waste a good crisis is alive and well here, after what initially seemed to be a go team kind of initial period. And I don't know, people use terms like boogaloo and things like that. But when you start to hear stories like this, where police are being empowered to stop people merely because of their license plate, really? I actually heard on the radio today, I love your reaction to this, Joe. Someone used the term, technicalities within the Constitution. Joe, what are technicalities within the Constitution?
Well, I guess there are things that get in the way of you wanting to do stuff, and that's what the Constitution is. That's the purpose of it. Yeah, no, I mean it's crazy for me because like everybody else, I've been following this and reading about it and everything, and every medical expert, at least every public health expert, seems to think South Korea did it pretty well. And they haven't done any lockdowns in South Korea. What they've done is widespread testing, widespread tracing. Everybody in the country, if you're out and about, you wear a mask, and those are available. And that's how they've been able to control this. And they've had very few deaths, especially recently, on it. And it seems everybody else, nobody disagrees with that. Everybody says, oh yeah, South Korea did it great. Yet we're not doing what South Korea does. We're not doing widespread testing. The FDA blocked private testing up until the 16th of March. We're not we're not even getting masks to our healthcare workers who are on the front lines of this, let alone making them available to anyone else. The president's a good example on this. He signed a bill today. He signed the stimulus bill today. A cluster of 12 people behind his desk, not 6 feet apart, nobody wearing a mask. God forbid one of them's coughing on all the rest of them. And, who knows what something might happen with that. So, we seem to be not, it's terrible for me as a policy expert because, you're always, when you're researching policy, you're always looking for what are the best practices. We seem to have an example of best practices in South Korea. Everybody acknowledges they're doing it right. And yet there's a total unwillingness, not just by the White House, but by seemingly most of the governors, or all of the governors really, to not follow that advice. And, is it stupidity or is it malice? It's that age-old question, the evil party versus the stupid party. And it always makes me glad to be in a party that's neither of those things.
Let's go to the stimulus bill. Now, I just want to point out, if I could stipulate to the court, that to this day, you were the only person who was able to successfully explain to me the tax cut. and just how not only it was purported to work, but it would work. And I say with tongue planted firmly in cheek, if someday you can explain both this stimulus and exactly how libertarian socialism works, then you will be my hero forever. But anyway, that's another point. I know you've been paying very close attention to this and I say this with love, as a wonk's wonk. Talk about, if you will, the stimulus and what exactly it's supposed to do, and what you think the practical impact is going to be. And I know that's a huge question, but let's start with the very notion that the purpose of dropping $2 trillion into the economy and what impact that's going to have.
So there's a lot of different motivations behind it. And, I can speak to some of those, but the at least stated goal of it, and, I'm not a proponent or opponent of it. I'm an observer, but probably the best case I could make for it is the government's putting the economy on pause in order to fight the coronavirus epidemic. There's probably a lot of different things they could have done to not get us to this point. There are probably things they could do instead of what they're doing. But given that all of these businesses have been ordered to close on orders of public health authorities and governors and so forth. How do we make sure the economy is ready to restart and businesses are ready to resume activity at the conclusion of this? So hence the stimulus. So there's essentially three main interests that are vocal on the harm that this is imposing on them. And so hence the bill is really three different pieces plus a fourth one, which we'll talk about. So it's individuals. We got a lot of unemployed and underemployed people right now. There's businesses because they've been forced to close or have had their customers vanish. And then there's states, which for all of the federal government's bluster and all of the power that is ascribed to it, all the federal government can really do is spend money and get in the way. It's states and local authorities that are really, they're the ones deploying the health authorities. They're the ones that are building the temporary hospitals. They're the ones buying the ventilators and deploying them. So they're the ones actually doing all this stuff. So those were the three voices that came to Congress and said, we need help. And since it's the federal government, what that means is money. So taking those one by one, individuals, big part of it is a boost to unemployment insurance. So if you're unemployed right now, you go and apply for your state unemployment insurance program. Every state pays a certain amount. It varies by state and it varies by your income. Federal government's tacking $600 a week on top of that. So for instance, in the District of Columbia where I live, unemployment maxes at about $444 a week. Now it's $1,044 a week for 4 months, after which we hope this is over with. And so that 444 is the state payment, and then the feds are doing 600 on top of that. That's part of this bill. Another part of this bill is individual payments. That's probably gotten the most attention. So everyone, asterisk, will get $1,200 on a one-time payment from the federal government. If you're married filing jointly, that's times two, $2,400. And then if you have kids, it's $500 for each kid. So if you're a family of four, 2 parents, 2 kids, that would be $3,400. I say asterisk because it's phased out if you make too much money. So if you make more than $75,000 for a single or $150,000 for a married couple, you're going to get less than that amount. And if you're over like $99,000 for a single or $200,000 for a couple, you're going to get nothing from that. And that's keyed off of your tax return that you most recently filed. And it's going to be treated like a tax refund. So if you've given your direct deposit information, that'll show up in your bank account. And if you haven't, then you'll get a paper check in the mail. So those will be going out soon. And that's about $300 billion worth of checks. So that's individuals. Then there's businesses. So part of it's a payroll tax holiday. So whenever you work, you get taxes taken out of your paycheck for Social Security and Medicare, and then the employer actually puts in an equal amount separately that doesn't show up on your pay stub. That employer side is going to be waived, I think, to the end of the year or nearly to the end of the year, or at least a couple of months. And then in addition to that, there are direct loans and grants to large businesses that are very politically connected, like the airline industry. And then smaller businesses through the Small Business Administration. And so you can fill out a loan and an application and all of that. And a lot of those have provisions to be waived completely. So they're really not much different from grants, but they're going to be structured as loans, at least initially. And then states just get a whole bunch of money funded through a couple of different sources, including direct grants. And every state's guaranteed a certain amount. So when you add it all up, it's about $1.5 trillion of direct payments and about $800 billion worth of loans. And then in addition to that, because it's a bill in Congress, there's a bunch of junk and pork and stuff in there. There's a lot of coverage on that. Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. gets $25 million. Thank you. Next time I take my husband to the opera, I'll be able to thank all of the taxpayers all over the country for helping subsidize that through this bill. There's a lot of other fun stuff in the bill, but that's the gist of it, is individuals, businesses, and states. And each one of them was like, were the most important. And so in classic form, Congress compromised and made it a bill 3 times as large.
So, you know, I'm going to ask probably the most rhetorical question of all time. Who pays for this?
Yeah, well, we all do. And, you know, the Libertarian Party's putting out a statement on, you know, you'll get a $1,200 check, but if you add up all of the spending in this bill and divide it out by number of people, it's $6,000. So, okay, you get a $1,200 check, but you're paying $6,000 for it. And even if you're unemployed and going to get that supplemental $600 a week payment for a couple of months, maybe you break even or only come out a little bit ahead on it. So, you know, it gets tacked onto the national debt. You know, if you really wanted to make this a boring conversation, we could talk about Federal Reserve monetary policy and kind of how that debt is monetized and where the money actually comes from and all of that. But it's us. It's national debt. Thank you. Thank you all.
Now, this is in light of the fact I call it the stealth quantitative easing, squeeze as I call it, that has been taking place really in the last 4 to 5 months of 2019. I think it was Market Watch that drew out almost a dollar for dollar analogy in the inflation, if you will, in the stock market with the direct contribution of the federal government essentially printing money. So for everyone who said, my 401k, there was a quid pro quo, to use the other more popular words from 2019. And that quid pro quo was the national debt. So I am actually intrigued by some of that whole crazy Fed stuff because, you know, here in Rhode Island, for example, and I'm sure you've run into this when you were with the Tax Foundation or now that you're in private practice, at literally every state, where folks don't draw the connection between bonded debt and the impact on their futures. You know, let's issue some bonds. What could possibly go wrong? Somehow they'll get paid off. What's happening to our currency, Joe? What's happening to potential inflation? What's the actual medium to long-term impact of this?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know if I know the answer because it's about predicting the future, and there's a lot of people who could probably give you different answers on it. If I were to guess, I'd say we're in a very strong position right now by virtue of everyone else being so weak. Nobody wants European Union bonds right now. Nobody wants Chinese bonds right now. Nobody wants Russian bonds right now. And, you know, and Japan's in crisis, Britain's in crisis. We look pretty good by comparison and relatively, which, you know, really shouldn't be giving us a lot of comfort. I mean, America used to, you know, we used to be better than, you know, well, at least we're not all of those other countries. We used to actually be something much more proud, but that's the gist of it. And so there's a bit of a flight to safety all over the world. Everybody's scared of investments because of the direction of things. People can't predict the future, and investors don't like it when they can't predict the future. And so there's a big flight to safety to the U.S. Treasury bond and to the U.S. dollar. And so a lot of people are buying it, including a lot of unsavory people who overseas who get their money through terrible ways. And here we are where they sock it. They buy property here, they buy bonds, and they invest in our companies. So actually this week, the 1 month U.S. Treasury bond and the 3 month U.S. Treasury bond went negative on interest rates. And, you know, that's a complicated way of saying people are now paying the U.S. Treasury to hold their money for them. They're willing to do that. And, you know, that's not normal. That shouldn't be, but here we are.
So despite all, you talk about a flight to safety, somehow amongst all this chaos and uncertainty, Latin America, Western Europe, the Far East, trading markets, supply chains, somehow we're still perceived as a safe haven. That's a comment on the world economy, isn't it? The corporate bailouts, and I'll use the populist word bailout. How prevalent are they? People seem to take particularly offense these days at the airlines. How do the airlines fall when doing this whole mess?
They get a big amount of support in this bill, and they've taken quite a number. I've seen different statistics of something like 50% drop in travel, 90% drop in travel. It's a big drop in travel, and they are making it up to a small degree by moving supplies around the country, because there's a lot of equipment and materials that need to be moved around the country. I guess they got a big boost this morning because every congressman needed to fly to Washington, D.C. to vote on this bill. But for the most part, it's air travel has pretty much dropped by a huge amount. And the hospitality industry generally is really suffering right now. I doubt you could find any business in the country, aside from maybe niche ones like obviously the healthcare industry or employment attorneys or manufacturers of certain materials that we're using, and yeah, Netflix and grocery stores. They're all doing well, but everybody else and everybody who works for everybody else is having a bad time right now. And I guess if you wanted to be nice about it, you could say the congressional bill is supposed to try to help all of them. But of course, being legislation, it's not a market. Legislation is who knows what congressperson, and every congressperson has a close relationship with the airlines because they ride them every day. I live in Washington, D.C., and every Monday morning they're arriving from their home districts, and every Thursday evening they're flying out back to their home districts. So, their DCA airport is full of members of Congress at those times. So, airlines, people take their meetings with the airlines, and so that's why they end up getting front and center on there. And there's some jokes on there online about airlines, over the years, like, no, you can't bring that bag on. No, you have to pay for that now. And then they turn around and ask for help. The argument you hear from them is they didn't cause this virus. They didn't invent this virus. This isn't their fault. Of course, a lot of people could say, this isn't my fault. Why am I suffering?
Right. And the prospect that 3 weeks ago, airlines were staring down the face at a unending series of record profits, with customer service being conveniently hidden behind the TSA under fees that they seemingly invented at will, to claim complete collapse after 2 or 3 weeks, to me that's astonishing. No one even tries to fake it anymore, do they? That whole moral hazard thing, is it permanently gone in our government? Are there consequences for anything?
I'm actually, I share with you, surprised at how quickly a lot of businesses have run into trouble. And I'll try not to name names of companies, but there's a prominent restaurant chain that announced, I think yesterday, that they can't make April rent on all of their properties. And I'd like to think I guess I'm financially conservative. I didn't think I really that was, but like, I have enough money to handle rent for a couple of months if I needed to. And it's just shutting down stuff for a couple of weeks really is doing a number on the national economy in ways that I certainly didn't anticipate, and I think a lot of people didn't anticipate. And no, and so we'll see if this bill helps or if it proves to be kind of insufficient and malapportioned and going to the wrong things and leaving out a lot of other things.
Right. Corporate stock buyouts. Does this, that's been cited as the bogeyman over the last few years, where corporate profits have gotten. I guess I always believed in the value of retained earnings, but call me crazy.
Well, we tax them. There's a punitive extra tax on retained earnings. So we've decided in our tax code we don't want corporations to retain earnings for a rainy day. And then of course through the tax code we tax preference debt rather than equity. So we want them to borrow lots of money. I don't think we should, but that's how we've written the tax code.
Well, and explain that to us, because these are the two type of nuances that are lost in a nation whose political arguments are largely based on populist appeal and identity politics. Why, as a nation, why wouldn't we encourage retained earnings?
No, that's a very good question. And, I was CEO of a nonprofit, and I've been on, helped advise a lot of other nonprofits. And there's a golden rule for best practices for nonprofits that you should have 6 months of operating expenses in cash. And, it's really tough for nonprofits to hit that. A lot of them do, which is impressive, which is why I think you'll see nonprofits more resilient than some businesses in this situation, because they're kind of trained to be ready for feast and famine like this. Because it seems like a lot of businesses don't even have 1 month of expenses ready in cash, let alone 6 months worth. And of course, part of this situation has been the financial markets seizing up so dramatically as they have, which has cut off normal help. So, a lot of businesses have lines of credit. A lot of businesses feel like they can get loans whenever they need to, but when all of a sudden everybody's dumping everything and running to cash and not accepting collateral for anything, you can't do that stuff. So, the Federal Reserve had to step in first to buy up government bonds in order to inject more money into circulation, and then to start buying commercial paper issued by corporations, which means, that means there's a run on the bank going on. And it's harder to tell now because everything's digital. So we don't have it like in the olden days when people would line up outside the bank and get their sacks of money from the teller and like in It's a Wonderful Life. Now it all happens on computer screens where we can't really see it, but that's what's been happening. And the Federal Reserve views its job as lender of last resort in making sure that banks that have assets don't run out of cash. And so, that's where they've been putting it, to the tune of, I think it's about $4 trillion so far this month.
But I thought or as libertarian circles would love to say, must stress tests. Haven't we gone, in years following the 2008 collapse? And I guess I'm old enough to have seen enough collapses that I can smell them coming, not early enough. But if we, after going through stress tests like we have for a number of years post 2008, and given the fact that the pension bubble is still out there, and given the fact that the student aid and student loan bubble is still out there, has the Fed backed themselves into a wall? Because there really is no more place to go, is there, other than just to print currency?
Well, and I think that's part of the dilemma for them, because interest rates are now at zero. It's really hard to go below that. Japan's experimented with it with some uneven results, and there's only so many more things that they can do. They're buying commercial paper. They're backing. I think they're backing mutual funds now in order to prevent them from, or money market funds rather, in order to prevent them from breaking the buck. So it's a lot of the things they learned how to do in the 2008 crisis. So they have that playbook. And I'm not really sure what more they can do beyond what they're doing now. And, the danger is that if we go overboard on this, we end up with this zombie economy of these businesses that are not open, that we're pumping cash through, like, blood transfusion into a person that's not going to make it, and paying workers who we're preventing from working, and giving money to consumers who we're preventing from spending it. And I think Americans are good people. They understand the public health emergency, and I think they're willing to do this for a couple of weeks, if that's what it means to not have 500,000 dead Americans from this virus. But if it seems like there's no end in date, and that people don't really know what they're doing, and that this doesn't really seem right, there may be consequences for elected officials that have gotten us into this situation. This was entirely avoidable. It was entirely, there's no reason this had to happen, as evidenced by South Korea and Singapore and Iceland and other places that have beaten this virus without strangling their economy.
Who do you think that's a reflection of? Develop that. I mean, which politicians, start to take the heat in
Well,
particularly in an environment where for years they always seem to narrowly dodge election year. Now it's front and center.
Well, first and foremost, I would say probably the FDA commissioner, the Food and Drug Administration. Um, the FDA likes to paint itself as making sure that our food is safe and that our medicines are safe and don't kill us and all of that. And there's a kernel of truth to it. I think it's overblown. But if that's what they stuck to, that's fine. But they were actively preventing, we're trying to fight this virus. And I don't know if you've heard the story of Dr. Chu in the Seattle flu study. This is a project that predates all of this, where they're just tracking the extent of the flu in the Seattle area. And Dr. Chu, she's one of the doctors on that project. So every day they're getting samples from people because they're trying to track the evolution of the flu and treatments for it. And so they decided to go back once this started happening. This is back in January and February, to go back and test their samples to see do any of them come up as positive for the coronavirus. And samples started coming back as positive. And so they brought in the health authorities and said, this person has the coronavirus. We better trace him and quarantine him and everything. And this person has the coronavirus. And the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, came and said, stop testing your samples for the coronavirus. You are a research laboratory, not a diagnostic laboratory. You're not allowed to do that. And to her credit, Dr. Chu said no, and basically defied the federal government and kept testing, which is why Seattle's a little bit earlier than a lot of the rest of the country is on getting a handle on this situation. So, they ended up having people work from home earlier, closing large events earlier. And I think they're going to get their peak earlier and get their recovery earlier than a lot of other places. And then, as this thing started bubbling up through the first half of March, nobody had tests. And, we've gotten all these statements from the White House. On March 6th, they said that would be the deadline where we'd be testing 1 million. We have tested 1 million people. Today is March 27th. We still haven't tested 1 million Americans. And a lot of that was the FDA, up until March 16th, refused to allow private testing. They were like, no, our test. You have to use our test. South Korea has a test that works. China has a test. There's debate about whether it works or not. Italy has a test. There's lots of tests out there. The World Health Organization's developed a test. And, no test is perfect. No test is 100% accurate. No test is, the FDA wanted a test that would test the flu and test this and test that. But when you're fighting something like this, time is of the essence. And I don't know whether it was just a sclerotic bureaucracy or a turf war or what it was, but the FDA did not view this with the urgency that it did. And, maybe it sounds hyperbolic, but, every American who's dying of this is because of that. Everybody since then, it's been a defensive thing. So, if some governor went too far or some governor acted too early or acted too late, they should certainly get whatever ire is due them. But ultimately, that's just kind of a percentage shift of how bad the problem's going to be. Why this is a problem at all is because the FDA decided they were going to muscle everybody out of this and then screwed it up big time. That's my answer. I don't know if you have a different answer.
Well, I guess where I find dark irony is that the very government institutions that are so often purported to be our lifeline, and the reason why government needs to exist, is in so many instances in this situation, and has always been, typically the real villain. It's the inability to provide competition and open markets to medical devices through a number of policy decisions that has led us to the point where we don't have the masks and the material and the manufacturing capacity to do so. It's
and we just repealed the medical device. imagine if we still had the medical device tax.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking about the ventilator shortage, and I mean, we had a punitive tax on that stuff up until very recently.
Right. And what that, as I remember correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, that was a part of the Obamacare funding mechanism, wasn't it?
Yeah. And, so, yeah, I don't want to sound too negative on this. It's, it's a terrible situation. Thousands of 1,500 Americans have died so far. It's going to be more. Who knows how many more? There have been some good developments. We're waiving stupid rules that prevent doctors from working across state lines, or helping make sure that rules that stopped. It's kind of amazing. Every time I see some of these waivers, I was like, why was that even a rule to begin with? So, restaurants being able to sell alcohol to go, that's nice, I guess. So, hopefully out of this, we'll get some laws taken off the books that probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. But, the big one, which we really haven't done enough about, is this FDA monopoly on everything. I mean, and when you think about it, the job of the FDA is to prevent stuff from happening. Their job is to prevent vaccines from hitting the market until they've been tested. Their job is to prevent tests from being utilized until they've given their okay. Their job is to prevent research laboratories from doing diagnostic things, and preventing diagnostic labs from doing research things. But I'd like to think that if libertarians were calling the shots, we'd be having doctors making these decisions and not bureaucrats, especially doctors who seem to know what they're doing in fighting epidemics.
And we certainly wouldn't have allowed barriers to entry to create artificial stoppages on the very type of facilities we need at times like this. I always talk about, the notion that hospitals are able to, or have to apply for certificates of needs for facilities. In a free market, shouldn't a medical institution be able to adopt whatever practices, whatever businesses it wants to get into based on its own support and its own determinations?
Yeah, no, and they just, today, just in New York, announced they were opening a temporary hospital in the Javits Center, and Governor Cuomo has asked every hospital to increase its capacity by 50%, and any hospital that wants to can increase it to 100%. A lot of them are eager to do it. They're doing it. They're willing to do it because they wanted to do it before. And instead, you had state regulatory authorities capping how big their hospital can be. And, I've seen a lot of the different statistics comparing how many beds we have per 1,000 people against other countries. And so I don't really know whether we're the top of the world or bottom of the world, because I've seen different answers on all of that. But I mean, let's let the market answer some of these questions. And because I think the reason we're caught so short and so flat-footed on this is because we've so controlled the decision making on this and excluded market participants from making these decisions based on those factors. And then the people who have accumulated all the power to themselves to have a monopoly on those decision makings, then they screwed it up, or they were unwilling to make it, or they made bad decisions for stupid reasons.
Right. And if there's
that's not very scholarly.
No, but if there are no moral hazards to bad decisions, then companies are able to continue to exist in the light of these bad decisions, when in fact companies need to fail and allow openings in the marketplace for those companies equipped, or those individuals equipped, to provide market-ready answers.
And I guarantee you, no one from the FDA is getting fired.
No,
because that's just not how they view it. A lot of other people lost their jobs this month, but no one in the FDA leadership will. And I'll have to check the stimulus budget. I bet they probably got a budget increase.
I wouldn't dispute that. I would, if you're a betting man, Joe, I'll let's take a poll of available libertarians on that one. So we've come full circle here. We're rewarding incompetence. We are preventing willing players to enter the marketplace to answer our needs. We're using various attempts at nationalization to force into the marketplace others who might not be equipped. Is there any chance that we learn from any of this? And how do libertarians?
And
how do libertarians help accomplish that end?
well, it's not going to happen without us, because there's no interest in the Democratic Party in learning from this, and there's no interest in the Republican Party from learning this. Even if, and I don't want to necessarily say there's bad actors in them, there are some, but for the most part, it's just politicians are trained to think on such short-term time horizons that they don't really want to open that kind of jar. But for libertarians, this is an opportunity to show that we are the adults in the room, that we would make decisions based on science and medicine and long-term results and good policy and civil liberties and good health outcomes and actually solving problems, not just spinning our wheels or fighting about bureaucratic turf wars. So I don't know whether if this was England, what they would do is they'd set up a royal commission to study it, kind of like we did after the 9/11 report or after the Kennedy assassination, to analyze everything and make recommendations for how things should be fixed in the future. We don't really do that in the United States. Those are, kind of the exceptions that prove the rule. And even in those cases, nothing was really done afterwards to really change anything fundamental. So maybe libertarians need to do that and come up with an analysis and lay out all of the things that need to change, how we need to transform how healthcare is provided, how we need to transform what are the early warning signs for things like this, and what are the best practices for dealing with it. It's not going to go away. I mean, this is going to be a defining event for a long time to come as something people are going to remember on. We're going to build nostalgia around it, about the time that we all had to be close to our families and eat dinner together all the time. But it's going to have a death count that is going to, it's already on track to surpass 9/11. So it's going to be seared into our memories. The danger is that we will always fight the last war, that we'll come up with stuff that maybe would have helped in this situation, but doesn't anticipate the next one. And that would be unfortunate. But it's an opportunity for us, and there's really no one else. And that's what's sad. There's no one else internationally. There's no one else domestically other than libertarians. So this is our chance to show that that we care, that we don't want hundreds of thousands of Americans to die, and that if we were calling the shots and making decisions and setting the policy, we wouldn't be going through any of this. And I firmly believe that.
Very often, folks from the progressive movement talk about fairness, and they talk about caring, and we're portrayed as being uncaring corporatists whose blood runs cold and are emotionless when it involves quote unquote human rights. When you look at situations like this, at any level, with any degree of success whatsoever, has, despite a generation lost, despite trillions of dollars spent, has our national government, through its increasing control, delivered any sense of fair solution in terms of the reality of what's happening in front of us right now? Is there any sort of dignity, caring, or emotion? Or are simply the folks who die from this, the unnecessary deaths because of our ill-preparedness, the result of a government that's more interested in self-perpetuation than it is at all in sacrificing itself to solve problems?
The money's going to help. So, it's, I guess, good on the federal government on getting us money. But what ultimately is going to make the difference is the healthcare workers that literally are taking their life in their hands right now in order to save other people every single day and collapsing from exhaustion, working double shifts, triple shifts, doing it. What's going to save us are the family members looking out for each other, the the neighbors checking in on each other, teenagers watching kids while parents telework, people delivering groceries for senior citizens, and people who are immunocompromised who can't leave out and who can't go outside of the house. And no federal program can create any of that. It's individuals that do all that stuff. And I'm proud that so many libertarians have stepped up in so many ways on that. So in the DC area, there's a group of people that are delivering groceries, organized by some local libertarians, to people who can't leave their house. I've seen a lot of people, who lost their jobs, and people are connecting them with job opportunities, or at least income earning opportunities in the meantime. Everybody's watching out for each other right now. And, if libertarians are cutthroat and tear each other down, I'm not seeing it right now. We're coming together in a way that I think all Americans are, and I'm really proud of that. It sucks that we're in this situation, but we're doing what we can to make the best of it, and to make sure that everybody's doing as best as they can on it. So I am proud of that. And it's honestly practicing what we preach as libertarians. Libertarians argue that Democrats, they just want to create some new government program and throw a bunch of money at it. Republicans want to, I don't even know what Republicans believe in anymore nowadays. Whereas libertarians, the answers always rely on the market. And maybe that's a bad word, because the market is just shorthand for trillions of individual decisions made by millions of people every day. And we're stepping up to provide in the gaps right now. And there are just so many gaps.
Joe Bishop Henchman, activist, member of the Libertarian National Committee. He is a candidate for the chairmanship of the Libertarian Party, I'd like to disclose. But tonight's really been about the human interest side of the decisions government makes, and how decisions made literally over a handful of generations now have brought us to a point of national tragedy, but at the same time pointing out that through efforts like the Libertarian Party, self-ownership, self-autonomy, independence, volunteerism can actually, again, if you will, for lack of a better term, take back the day. And those are the attributes I think will reemerge from the American spirit at times of tragedy like this. And we can only hope so. Joe, I want to thank you for joining us, giving us kind of a primer, if you will, on the stimulus package. If I can try and sum it up, and please feel free to disagree or point out if I'm incorrect. You see this stimulus as, I'll use the term necessary evil. We need to reinfuse money. The execution of it is questionable, but at the same time, we had to do it. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know how I would have voted on it. It's, the unemployment, I think, is going to help with a lot of people. I wish we could just test and get masks out there and beat this virus and get the country open again, and that we didn't have to really go down any of this path. So, and then of course, there's a lot of unnecessary stuff in this bill too. It would have been nice to have libertarians in the Senate negotiating this package, and it would have been, I think, completely different from what we saw. And that's what we're working for in Libertarian. Let's elect libertarians so that it's not just Democrats and Republicans, insiders at the negotiating table on these things. Let's get libertarians at that table.
Excellent. Why don't you give us a website where you can tell us where people can find out more about you and your efforts to
winwithjoe.org. winwithjoe.org.
There you go. How many conventions have you been to now, virtual as well as real, as bricks and mortar?
I'll have to add them up, but it's over half. About 26 of the 51 state conventions in the last year or so. So a lot of great libertarians doing a lot of.
And you've done the 2 in 1 day. That seems to be the new gold standard for.
Oh, I've done three. I've done three in one day several occasions.
Really?
It's yeah. No, it
What,
almost beats in my professional career, and Rhode Island's part of this story. My personal best was a breakfast event in Rhode Island, a RIPEC event, and then a lunch event in New Jersey to a group of activists, and then a dinner event in Washington, D.C. So that's been my personal record, but no, I've done this because it's over a weekend, so I can do three in a weekend. That's easy. It's three in a day that's really hard to do.
That's outstanding. And testament for those. I'm going to ask you one more question, so we got just a minute or two. There are those folks out there, and you've seen it on Twitter and you've seen it on the interwebs and social media, who would say that this is a defining moment for the Libertarian Party in the sense that the necessity of a governmental reaction and a collective reaction to a crisis like this proves that libertarianism cannot run a government, cannot be a prevalent source in society. What do you say to them?
Well, I guess I must have missed when libertarians made all of these decisions. It's not libertarians running the FDA. It's not libertarians shutting down the economy. It's not libertarians making a mess of testing. And it's not libertarians preventing medical equipment from getting out there or helping make sure that hospitals have the resources they need. It's the Democrats and the Republicans who are doing all of that. So, you know, if people want to blame us for everything that's happened, I certainly don't accept that. If people want to give us the opportunity to prove that we can do better, I'm all for that. And a lot of the solutions that we've been turning to that have proven effective, letting doctors work across state lines, bringing back retired medical, removing restrictions on the production of new medical equipment, those are libertarian answers that are going to be part of this solution. I think, I've heard the saying, nobody's a libertarian in a crisis. There seems to be a lot of libertarians out there right now. We had the governor of Connecticut, who I would not call a libertarian at all, just unilaterally end their ban on plastic bags for health reasons. That's, I never thought I would have to praise the governor of Connecticut on something, but good job on that.
There you go. Well, Joe, again, thanks for joining us tonight. I know that you've got a full slate, and I'll be seeing you soon and looking forward to a continued conversation.
Anytime, Pat.
Joe Bishop Henchman, activist, attorney, tax attorney, public policy expert, and libertarian activist as well on the coalition. We're going to take a brief moment, of course, as always, to acknowledge the folks who support this show. Yacht Club Bottling Works, you can tell it's been a long show. It's been a long day. I've been feasting on diet root beers all night. My personal friend Joel actually has been trying the orange cream and the black cherry. Quality stuff. Air Sciences. Listen, Daryl Gould, airsciences.net. In moments like this, a lifetime spent in, if you will, working with biohazards, mold remediation, have left him uniquely prepared to understand what will and won't work in terms of cleaning your home environment, your work environment. If you're running any type of daycare institution, there's a lot of folks who are showing up who are suddenly experts in the field, folks who have no experience whatsoever. Air Sciences. And of course, Beacon Shipping and Logistics. The automobile shippers of the gods. They've been with us since the beginning. 1-855-3-SHIP-IT, beaconshippingandlogistics.com. You buy that car on eBay, even right now in the midst of this madness, you got to get a car ready for school once school resumes, and you find something at a dealership far away. Maybe it's a family member who wants to get a car to you. Whatever, beaconshippingandlogistics.com, an international company based right here in Warwick, Rhode Island, as we say. If you go to Coalition Radio Network, we've got a couple of other ways that you can support our vendors. The Libertarian Domain, our newest support system. Listen, if you've got time off right now and you're thinking about that project, upgrading your email system, that blog, that website, the libertarian domain, affordable domains, email support, web support, a number of network security sources. Profits from that go directly to support liberty candidates and their publicity, both through shows like this and others. We're going to be trying to set up over the next few days a final schedule for the next few weeks. Work with us. Look for our notifications of oncoming shows where we bring thought leaders, subject matter experts in an outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient environment. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.